So I want to talk through a couple of issues that I think all of us were experiencing on this first round of expository papers. One of the key issues, and because we really were focusing on thesis statements for this particular paper, was missing significance in the thesis. So I want to talk through 3 sample thesis statements. I wrote these, so they're not really connected to any specific student's writing. I think it outlines what were good thought processes and then some ways that we can get them a little bit deeper. You've probably recognized already that this kind of paper is moving us a little bit away from some of the teacher-directed stuff that you did in the past to things that are more college preparatory. For those of you that are heading to college next year, your professors will assume that you already know how to do this stuff. So the time that we spent developing topics and thesis statements and all those things maybe felt a little bit more open-ended than previous papers that you've written, but hopefully will be something that by the end of our time together you'll feel good about. So you can look at this thesis and see that it clearly identifies like a point that is going to prove that ambition fuels increasingly violent acts, and it's going to do it in 3 scenes. The danger with this thesis, of course, is that it's very heavily connected to just what happens in the story. And those of you that ended up with low B's, high C's, low C's, wrote thesis statements that were not going above and beyond just the what of the story. So if plot summary was a part of your paper, which was true of many of us, then that's where the C and the B came through, because it's the goal of this paper was to identify a more significant point to prove that helps us interpret the story. In this second version of the thesis, you'll see that a couple ideas are added. So now we have a specific relationship that's created here about violence and ambition, that as he gets more violent, his ambition grows together as well. So there's a direct relationship between the two. And then as well, we have specific things that are going to be talked about with each scene. So the necessity of Duncan's murder, right? He's got to kill Duncan to become king. Self-preservation in the murder of Banquo. He's got to kill Banquo to remain king. And then this third kind of murder, which is just crazy. It was just terrorism. There's no real purpose for it. The murder of Macduff's family. All right. This is good, again, because it is working through a specific relationship between these 2 themes, violence and ambition. It identifies key scenes, but also specific things to talk about in each of them. But the only issue here is that the thesis is still largely just about what happens in the play, right? It still is mostly reliant on plot summary, which you'll see a difference here for this rather long but more specific A-level thesis. In Shakespeare's Macbeth, the severity of Macbeth's crimes grow in direct relationship to his growing ambition, the same as before, which causes him to increasingly ignore his conscience. That's an added bit for significance. This is seen in his initial hesitancy to murder Duncan, his hallucinatory insanity following the assassination of Banquo, and the nihilistic numbness of his murder of Macduff's family. That should say nihilistic, not nihilist. Okay, a couple cool things about this, right? It identifies specific significance that we're going to not just talk about this relationship, but also about his conscience. So we're talking about his interiority, the way that he thinks about what he's doing. Again, we have specific scenes with specific purposes. And this one now, instead of just talking about the facts of the murder, is now diving into how Macbeth thinks about these murders, right? Which is a higher level kind of thinking about the play. So in the C-level thesis, you have this is what happens. In the B-level thesis, you have here's a progression, here's like a movement, here's something that helps us kind of see like how he goes from one place to another. In the A-level thesis, you have here's the progression, here's the movement that happens in the story. On top of it, here's like the significance, the way that he thinks about it. Here's like not just what he does, but why he does it, right? Which hopefully you can see as an important thing. If you're still struggling with that connection, I would encourage you to do a couple things. I would encourage you to read back through these sentences and try to see what differences you yourself can spot. And then as we get to this next paper, and I'll sound the alarm for this encouragement again, I really encourage you to come see me during clinic. You would be surprised what 5 to 10 minutes of talking about your thesis would do for your paper. So if you're struggling with these things, please don't struggle alone. All right, a couple other issues. So one of them was bad pacing. Many papers only talked about the first 3 acts of the play, which was unfortunate. And a lot of those papers ended up with low B's at the highest, and many of them were in the C range because they were incomplete analyses of the story. If you don't talk about the end of the play, you're not talking about the whole play. So to help with that, I would encourage you guys to consider skeleton outlines at the very least, where you say, here's a topic sentence, here's some of my quotes, ways to maximize the 4 pages instead of rushing through them. My concern is for some of you, you just got to 4 pages and then stopped. But if you've written one more paragraph, your paper could have gone up an entire letter grade just because you would have handled the last part of the play instead of just saying, well, I got to 4 pages. I know I'm only in the middle of the play, but I'm just going to stop because I got to the page limit. Think about this paper as a test. This is really like the big grade associated with the readings that we do. So it's incumbent on you to demonstrate your understanding of the whole text, and not just of the text, but the way that we talk about the text as well, which leads us to this next point. Make sure that you're using class notes and taking advantage of class notes. Those notes are there to help you. The quotations in the PowerPoints have been selected because I think that they're important quotes. And so if you're going to use quotes in the paper, it makes sense to use the ones that I've already identified for us as important ones. The insights in the PowerPoints are also there for you. They're yours. They're ways to make your argument more insightful and to push your argument forward. You don't have to use them, but to not use them or not interact with them suggests a lack of awareness of those insights. And then finally, use the PowerPoints as a model for how to analyze. We're walking through an analysis of these stories together. So if you're not going to use the content, at least try to look for the skill that's being identified in the PowerPoints. Okay, one more aspect of this video, I want to talk through just a couple things about Turnitin itself. So when you go in as a student, you'll be able to click on the class, and then you'll be able to click view to see your paper. When your paper comes up, there are 3 kinds of ways that I make comments, all right? So one of them is a sticker, and this bumper is really like it's something that I find myself saying a lot, and so I include it's just a generic phrase, right? These purple ones, this is Turnitin's grammar grader. So Turnitin does these things themselves. I interact with these, so if I disagree with the grammar error, I will dismiss it, and so you won't see any errors in here that I haven't personally read through and decided were true of the paper. Then, of course, there are narrative comments. For each narrative comment, you'll see one of our 5 domains is identified, so that when you go to, well, let me just identify one more of these things here. So for some of these, for instance, in this one, where is this? Well, so in a handful of these, you'll see that there is both a kind of a pre-formatted comment and then a comment that's mine. So the gray part is what's already there, and then the white part, if you see a white part, would be like this one, is what I have actually written, right? Typically at the end of the paper, there'll be one comment that doesn't have a domain for it, and that's kind of my summary comment on your paper. When you click on your rubric, you'll be able to see how you did in each of the individual domains, so focus, content, organization, style, and conventions. And you'll also be able to see all of the comments that I made for each of them, all right? Sometimes comments will be positive, of course, sometimes comments will be negative, but you can click on them and see all the ones that are there. In the written reflection, I'm asking that you guys look through these comments and give specific things about these comments, so please take advantage of these tools to learn as much as you can about how to succeed on the next paper.